like chatbot, and that gives you for me, it gives me two reactions at the same time. Wow, like mesmerizing, like what the power of that thing could be, and whoa, scary. What that might do at home, but also in the hands of somebody else. And I was speaking, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago with the CEO of Microsoft. I saw him at something, and we're friends. And I said, tell me about this. Like, what do you think? And he said, it's the most significant development in technology since the personal computer.
Oh, wow.
He said, this is huge, and it's going to have enormous consequences, some of which we don't even begin to know yet. So that's
good consequences or bad consequences?
Well, I think it could be both. Yeah, could be both.
Do you have any, can you give us some insight on any of those consequences?
Well, one of the things that it certainly is doing is, it's just like the personal computer was and the internet was, it could be highly disruptive to businesses. Because if you think about, I don't know, businesses that require people to write things, or people that require people to, process data or things like that, this has an ability to replace all that in a nanosecond. So I imagine as it becomes more mainstream, it could result in very significant disruption in some industries, elimination of jobs. Now, it may create other opportunities and jobs on the other side. It's a little too early to tell, but at a minimum, this is creating a huge pressure on business models that are hugely, or opportunity, depending how you look at it, on business models that are highly dependent on human processing.
They could recreate this entire interview and have you saying something completely different.
Yes, that's the scary. So your capacity to take all the information and present something that would be credible as the words or ideas of others, when in fact they weren't, is very plausible. I mean, there's two scary things about it. One scary thing is they could do that and present an interview that's not far from this. That's one scary thing. Another scary thing is they might present an interview that seems very credible, that's completely different than this. And there lies the problem, because one of the things that I found on the campaign trail, I'm sure you find it with your listeners and your interviewees, people have lost trust. They've lost trust in their leaders. They've lost trust in the church. They've lost trust in the military. They've lost trust in business leaders. They've lost trust in government. The trust levels are, 15, 20%. Schools, they've lost trust in schools. They've lost trust in the media. They've lost trust in the accuracy of the information they receive. And this, if used poorly, could just reinforce that. I mean, who am I really talking to? What is really being said? Is it actually? And so you start to think about like an existential question: how does a society run if nobody trusts anything? Right? That's the worry I have, and finding leaders that can give people faith, are forthright, can lead through this, deal with these complexities. It's not easy. It's not easy.
It's this AI stuff scares the hell out of me. I mean, for anybody that's not putting this together, they could replicate the president of the United States and have him saying something completely different that looks 100% real.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, and that's, by the way, well, we'll get to that in my third part of the book we talk about, but part of that is the inaccuracies and the lack of trust in social media in particular. And that's a big thrust, but the absence of privacy on our information, combined with the pervasiveness of a social media narrative that's often completely inaccurate and misleading, that's feeding the mistrust.
Yeah. Do we have anything else to cover on technology?
I think we hit it, man.
All right, let's move on to data.
Yeah, so data, listen, I'm trying to get my head around these concepts in a way that I really understand them, but can also explain them. And I don't want to present myself as an expert. But as I said earlier in the interview, innovation is a byproduct of data. National security is a byproduct of data. Data is a superpower. Data is one of the defining things for who wins and loses the next decades of leadership in the world. And China has a plan for data. China is very purposeful about data. And because China's an authoritarian country, it has much more control of data. And my big point in this chapter is we don't have a data plan. We don't have a strategy for dealing with data.
What kind of data are we talking about here?
All data. I mean, if you think about, as an example, one of the reasons that the United States responded as incredibly quickly as it did to deal with COVID, you got to give, I think, President Trump appropriate credit for that warp speed, was because the pharmaceutical companies shared data. That data was the core for innovation and breakthrough. So data is a critical driver of innovation in remote vehicles, in artificial intelligence. And I mean, data is the underlying asset in AI. You're processing enormous amounts of data in pursuit of kind of outputs that come out of chatbots. So data is really critical. And we don't have a holistic data strategy for the country. And I talk about three things in the book, that this isn't comprehensive, but it's three things that I think are quite valuable. The first is privacy. We don't have a privacy regime for our data. And if it doesn't scare you, it scares me that when I order a pair of sneakers on the internet, for the next 3 months, every time I get a social media or email or whatever, I get some new advertisement for sneakers. So, I mean, God only knows where my data is going, who's processing it, how it's being used. We've lost complete control of our data. And I mean, there's the thing at the end, you sign and click, who knows who gets what. We are all vulnerable to our data floating out there in incredible ways. So we have no model for protecting privacy appropriately. And it's very decentralized and inadequate. And it puts us all at risk. And credit card theft and all these things are going up dramatically. Identity theft, all this stuff, because we don't have privacy on data. And at the same time, our individual data is growing exponentially. The amount of data around you is hundreds, maybe thousands of times what it was a year ago. Because look how much more you're engaging in ways that your digital footprint's growing. That's one thing. Second thing is we've got this pervasive social media environment. I've been going through, it's interesting to me. I'm old school. I like newspapers, so when I get on an airplane, I like to pick up a newspaper and read it on the airplane. I'm a dinosaur this way. They don't sell newspapers anymore.
Yeah.
You can't buy newspapers. Everything is online, and most people get their news from non-traditional news sources. They get their information from social media. And the big tech firms are the purveyors of this social media landscape, which is the opposite of a marketplace of ideas. It's not, hey, you pick and you decide. It's an entire narrative that's, for the most part, very left-leaning and progressive, which is shaping our understanding, or most Americans' understanding of the world, what's going on, the issues. And you just have to pick a couple examples to see that. And the Wuhan lab is the most obvious one, where it seems just common sense that if a virus was started in Wuhan, and which everybody acknowledged, and there's a lab in Wuhan that does all sorts of experimentation around such viruses, that there's probably a connection between those two things. Not 100% sure. It doesn't mean the Chinese even tried to do it. I'm not even arguing for the intent. It just seems like that connection is highly likely and obvious. And yet for years, we've been sold a narrative that anyone who says that's being a conspiracy theorist and all this stuff. And now we just find out very recently, no, there's been a lot of serious people in the intelligence community and elsewhere that have been thinking that for a long time. That's a perfect example of why people have lost trust in what information they receive. And so we need to do something about that. We need to create some sort of obligation, some sort of accountability for social media to play a role as a marketplace of ideas, where it's actually not a one-sided narrative. But one way to do that is to create liability associated with what social media companies produce. Right now, they can basically produce anything. They're not liable. And so there's a whole set of things that we need to think about to rein in big tech, because they're playing a role with social media that I think is very counter to America's interest. There's also, just as an aside, something that really pisses me off, but it's an example of, I think, the problem, is that, when we won the Cold War, the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, one of the things that made America successful was our big industry, particularly our technology firms, cooperated with the US government and the Pentagon because we were in pursuit of something together, which was America's security. That doesn't happen anymore. Project Maven, Google wouldn't have their workers, their developers wouldn't work with the Pentagon. None of the big tech firms work with the Pentagon with the exception of Microsoft to some degree. That's a huge problem. And so with an opportunity to be a US company and benefit all the ways it comes with that window of security and well-being that's being an American company, no, you gotta do your part. So that's the second piece that I argue. I'll say the third piece and then whatever thoughts you have. The third piece is, we're not in this alone. We've got great allies that we share everything with. Intelligence, defense spending, the Five Eye countries, where we have the most trusted circle of intel. We get their intel, they get ours. We should have a data strategy that's consistent with them because the more data you have, the more of a benefit it is. So countries like Australia, countries like the UK, where we've got these deep integrated partnerships, we should think about how to have data regime that goes head to head with China and puts us in a really strong position. And this is one of the areas that the next generation, hopefully 2024 and beyond, is going to have a dedicated strategy. We don't have that now.
Interesting. I don't have any questions
Okay.
with technology. So let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll hit the next chapter. All right, David, here we go. The final segment.
All right, home stretch.
So, leading renewal. Let's talk about confronting China and securing America.
Yeah, the thing about changing the direction of the country is you got to win elections, and you got to have ideas, and those two are related. You got to have leaders that can win primaries, win general elections, and then have ideas for taking the country forward, and then they got to execute them. And so, when I was thinking about writing Superpower in Peril, I didn't want it to just be an ideas book. I wanted it to be a leadership book too, because that's what it's all about. It's all about leaders. When I was telling that Ronald Reagan story, it's about the leaders. And so I identified a couple areas where I thought leadership was really, really important. And the first one was China.